All right, morning everybody. My name is Bobby Umar. Today is Wisdom Wednesdays for my daily broadcast for the Power Connection channel for LinkedIn Live. I'm here with my friend Fatima Zaidi.
Hi.
How you
Hi
doing?
Everyone. I'm doing good, thank you.
Good. So, I've known Fatima for a very long time. We worked together on DYP, Discover Personal Brand. She is a fantastic salesperson, business developer, CEO, hustler, side hustler, entrepreneur. There's just so much about her that I love. And so I'm excited to have her here today. The topic is going to be about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Now, if you're just joining us, make sure you first comment below and let us know where you're from. Are you from, because we've had people from like Africa, Asia, Australia, South America, United States, Canada. Let us know where you're from. And then, of course, as we're talking, you can share your thoughts on diversity and inclusion, or you can ask questions because she's our featured expert on that. And we'll go from there. And again, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, comment, make sure you tag people that want to be part of the conversation. Make sure you make sure you share this on your own pages so we can get more people part of the conversation. So, Fatima, let's get right into this.
Yeah.
Look at this. We are very diverse, right?
We are. We're like the token poster for diversity.
All right. So why don't you share a bit about your thoughts on diversity, inclusion in the workplace and why it's so important?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, diversity has become such a hot topic these days, and it's become such a controversial topic that HR leaders and recruiters and executives are all sort of looking to fill their quotas. And, there's obviously numerous ways that one can do that. But I think it's really important to peel back the layers and to really think about, is it just about filling a quota, or is it simply good for your business? I mean, I don't know how many people viewing right now have read McKinsey Financial's report Diversity Matters, but
I haven't. Okay, but I should. Okay.
But you should.
Yeah,
you should read it, because they analyze proprietary data sets for about 366 public companies across the world, and the findings were pretty clear. Companies that embrace diversity gain higher market share and a competitive edge in accessing new markets. There is a linear relationship in the US with diversity and financial performance. So every 10% increase at the executive level in racial and ethnic diversity means earnings before interest and taxes also increased 0.8%. So from a financial standpoint, those numbers are astounding. Also I think it's just important to think about, all right, so it's great for financial performance, but even, workforces these days, diversity and equality is front of mind for all recruiters, businesses, societies, but most importantly, the vital talent that drives future success. And I was also reading a study conducted by PwC, and they found that 76% of females and 86% of male millennials consider workplace policies when deciding which companies to work for.
Wow.
So those that aren't focusing on it today aren't just at risk of being left behind, they pretty much already are. So there's I could go on and on and on why diversity and inclusion is such an important topic and why it's just so good for your workforce. I think that stats have shown that we have made a lot of progress in the last 10 years, but I think we equally have a long way to go. I mean, take gender equality, for instance. Women account for 60% of college graduates today, but only 3% of executives worldwide, which is, that's pretty shocking to me. So I have my own story with diversity and inclusion. I moved to Canada.
Please share this. I'm good.
Yeah, so I moved to Canada when I was 17. I moved from the Middle East, and I came by myself. My family was still there. And one of the main reasons that I decided to move here is because I really wanted to get ahead in my career, and I knew that, given the challenges around the world with gender equality, especially where I was from, I would have a lot of obstacles. So I moved to Canada because it, compared to other countries, it is really a shining example, and we're miles ahead. But I've been working for the last decade in the tech industry, and I found with my experience, while it's been nothing short of amazing, that even here we have a long way to go. And I'm not just talking gender diversity, I'm talking ethnic, cultural, LGBTQ representation. And so I've just, really been doing a lot of studies and getting deeper and deeper into, why is diversity and inclusion so important, and what are the steps that we can take from a granular perspective, but also just from a broader perspective to actually sort of address this issue.
And so let me throw. First off, we have to be mindful of banging the table because it's shaking the camera. So,
oh yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to try not to bang because I'm seeing the shaking here. So, a few comments here. There's a lot of people here. So, right, there's someone from Germany, Toronto, Australia, Melbourne. There's another one from Australia. People are tagging people from the Netherlands. Neenan is here, James
the weather
here.
is better there.
Yeah. So
take me there.
We got lots of great people here online. They're asking, and they're talking about the importance of diversity, which is great. If you guys have any questions on it, some people say quotas are really good. Are there some companies that don't like quotas for diversity?
Yeah, I mean,
what's the drawback?
I think, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Personally, I think a lot of times companies focus on, in terms of implementation, there's no one size fits all policy.
Yeah.
So I think they'll often set hiring goals and quotas and call it a day rather than focusing on the pipeline rather than focusing on the day-to-day employee experience. Right. But I think in order to nurture and retain top talent, and in order to really have change that's impactful, companies need to start focusing on the day-to-day employee experience rather than the quotas and the pipelines. Right. Because that's the only way you're going to foster a truly inclusive environment where everyone sort of can contribute equally. And there's so many different definitions of diversity. Is it the color of your skin? Is it your background? Is it your narrative? I was reading, Audrey Blanche, I believe she used to work at Atlassian. She said diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being glad that you're there. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because from a quota perspective, you can definitely check all your boxes, but do people feel comfortable, bringing their ideas to the table? Do they feel like they belong? Do they like waking up and coming to work every single day? That's a whole other issue from your hiring quotas.
Right, yeah. Here's a comment though, interesting. Women themselves don't support women, especially for senior positions. Is that true? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, especially from the investment world standpoint. There is a lot of bias that goes both ways. It's not just men being biased towards women and their unconscious bias, but apparently a lot of studies have shown that also the bias goes both ways. Women are also have these prescriptive stereotypes of women maybe not being as good at business, not being as big of risk takers, not being as growth oriented. But I think the important thing to remember is these are stereotypes and these are bias, and they're completely unsubstantiated. There was actually a study conducted in Sweden. It was then published in the business journal Venturing Insights, and they wanted to look at whether or not any of these stereotypes were true, that men are more risk takers, they're better at leading businesses, they're more growth oriented. And so they analyzed 126 companies that had applied for VC funding and found that all of these biases are actually unsubstantiated. But what they did discover is, unfortunately, a lot of funding decisions, if not most, are made in alignment with these biases and not business sense, which is, pretty disappointing.
Wow, you've done your studies. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I really love this topic. I'm constantly reading studies about it. I talk about it all over the world because I'm really passionate about diversity and inclusion.
Great.
Yeah.
A couple comments here. I find being in the tech industry, companies are so worried about the quotas, but not focusing on the talent as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think, implementation is sometimes the biggest obstacle, and, focusing on hiring goals and quotas really negates from the fact that what you're trying to do is build a very inclusive environment from the ground up. And so I think really there's so many different ways and so many different companies that you can look to for inspiration. There's a lot of examples out there of companies that are doing a really good job on all cylinders. Right.
Another question here. How do you think leaders can be more inclusive within the workplace?
Yeah, so great question. I think it really starts with number one, policy. I mean, let's take Starbucks, for example. Bobby, do you remember the video that we watched, or that everyone pretty much watched, the two black men getting arrested in Starbucks and for doing nothing wrong? They just hadn't ordered anything, and so the store manager asked them to leave, and when they didn't, she called the cops. And I think that's a really interesting example, because videos, their arrests were viewed millions of times on social media, and Starbucks was compelled to take action, and they were obviously under the spotlight. And Executive Chairman Howard Schultz, one of my favorite leaders of all times, he was very quick to respond. He really did a deep dive of the situation, said that the store manager was acting on our unconscious bias, and they also apologized to the two men, but they also responded by closing their 8,000 company-owned stores nationwide and led their 175,000 employees through racial bias education to prevent discrimination. So I think that's a really good example of how you can be a very solid leader. It's not taking not putting up with behavior like that, not putting up with unconscious bias, leading your employees through training to recognize their unconscious bias. And I think for a lot of us, the unconscious bias and the stereotypes we have in our mind can often be the opposite of our conscious values. Right. I'm sure we all have biases and stereotypes. Sure. I know I do.
So do I.
The important thing is to be able to recognize them, address them, and then commit yourself to reducing them. And I think as a really strong leader, you need to put policies and implement, tactics in place that really help enforce these lessons throughout the duration of your employee's career.
And I think in that example, good leadership by Starbucks was to have that, to address it right away. I think even greater leadership would have been done now. What's the plan after this? How are we going to monitor this? How are we going to do more training afterwards? Because one day is not going to solve everything, but it definitely brings awareness to it. I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, studies have shown that one-off mandatory training sessions are rarely impactful, and that for it to be long-term and sustaining, these lessons need to be sort of enforced throughout the duration of an employee's career. But recognition is the first step, and Starbucks has committed, at least at the executive level, to taking action. Mm-hmm. And I think by responding in this way, they sent a very strong message to their employees, their customers, their stakeholders, and the community as a whole that they care about diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
We're getting a ton of comments here. Max from Australia is saying that I once worked for a company where it was all one ethnicity and I felt pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm curious how many people actually feel uncomfortable with that, because some probably don't and some probably do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, like, culturally, where you stand. For me, diversity is so important, which is why I love Toronto. I love walking into a multicultural city and, being at a restaurant, looking around and seeing people from all walks of life. Yes. That is so important to me, and I feel no differently about the workplace. I mean, think of it this way. When you have a sales team, or any team really, that's composed of the same people, they're obviously going to be inclined to solve challenges in the same way. But what happens if they come across a problem that they have trouble understanding or solving? Or what happens if they come across a client or a market that they can't relate to? Yeah. If you have diverse sales teams, they can better understand the needs and wants of the people they're selling to. And I think what's more is people want to see themselves represented at the companies that they're buying from. Yeah. Yeah. So a diverse workforce is more relatable to a modern and global market.
And that's one of the things, again, I love about being in Toronto, because Toronto's super diverse. Yeah. Like, you go to the beach and there's people of all different colors and types, which is fantastic. Totally. I love that. I
was actually recently, it's a little bit of a controversial comment, but I don't care. Yeah, sure. I was recently in Cape Town in South Africa, and it was kind of jarring. I think that's when I realized how important diversity is to me, because you'd walk into restaurants and everyone would be one ethnicity, and then you'd walk into where people would be working and it would all be another ethnicity, and there was a very stark division between the working class and the upper echelon communities. And for me, that was like a definite no-no, because I'd walk into a restaurant and I'm obviously colored, and people would look at me like, oh, interesting, like this is new, and that I realized we're so fortunate to live in a place like Toronto, where we get to, embrace diversity. I mean, we obviously have a long way to go, but we're, again, I'm telling you, miles ahead of like a lot of places in the world.
I actually grew up in New Brunswick on the East Coast, and there was interesting because we had I remember my high school, there was 2,000 people in my high school. It was a really big high school, and there was about 5 or 6 brown people, and there was about maybe 5 or 6 Asians, and there was like 3 black brothers, and that was it. Everyone else was white.
Funny.
And so when I first went to Montreal for university, I was like, wow, look at all these people, and it was just so diverse, and I really loved it, because for me, I find that I've always felt part of the cultural mosaic of Canada. I think that's something I take pride in, so it's something that I do love. We have another question here by James. What industry is strong in diversity and what are lacking? He mentioned engineering versus retail, etc., things like that.
Honestly, I would say at least in my experience, there's no one team or industry that's like super diverse. I think there's a lot of areas of improvement in almost all industries. I mean, think of nursing, it's like so predominantly women.
Sure.
Think of, the tech industry, it's predominant, at least in the engineering world, predominantly men. If we look at just like executives in Fortune 500 companies, they're all men. If you look at the investment landscape, it's usually all men. So it's hard for me to pick an industry where I'm like, yes, they're super diverse, because I think, unfortunately, just like the genetic makeup of humans is to have stereotypes and bias, and sort of which industries apply to like men or which industries apply to women. And also I think is proximity is always an issue too. And then that's actually one of the reasons why I love the initiatives Google has taken on. They launched a program called Howard West, where they sent 2 of their employees to Howard University, which, over 90% of the student population is Black, because proximity is so important.
Sure.
And these 2 employees are responsible for teaching computer science courses, overhauling the school's curriculum, and setting up Howard University Students for Success with tech firms, and ultimately bringing in a lot of employees for summer internships into Google.
Right.
And I think that's important because Google proactively came up with a community program to help address this issue. And since then, they've continued to expand on the program by expanding to other historically Black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions. And I think that is an awesome initiative because, again, proximity and having access and exposure is a game changer. I grew up in the Middle East, and I actually went to an international school, and my graduating class had 62 different nationalities.
Wow.
And which is so important to me. And then that's why I chose to come to Canada, because I wanted to be in a place that was super diverse, and I had already had access and exposure to it. So I think, giving people a chance and giving people the opportunity to have a platform, I think that is really what's going to change it all.
Okay, so I'm here with Fatima Zaidi, CEO of Quill and VP of 88 Agency. We're sharing our thoughts on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And again, we're here every day. I'm here every day, sorry, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for my Power Connection broadcast for LinkedIn Live. We'll have a guest every Wednesday. So I'm going to actually, if you have other people you want to put up as guests or suggestions for guests, tag them below. Let's get them part of the conversation. Comment, share your thoughts on diversity, ask questions. That we already have some more questions we want to get to, because diversity is actually pretty big. I mean, diversity is, people of color, it's LGBTQ, it's also women. So here's a question regarding women, which I think is very important because I'm also a huge feminist myself. How as women do you believe we can point out sexism in the workforce without sounding like you are complaining, but focus on recognizing and trying to have people become aware of this? Good question.
Honestly, I would do it. I'm a big believer of calling people out and putting people on the spot and not taking, I can't swear, so not taking from people.
It's just, we're all adults. You
can't, that's the thing, right? I think oftentimes it's always the women around me who are worried about coming across too aggressively or being too assertive or, being too promotional. And that's the issue. I think women need to do a better job of advocating for themselves and asking for what they believe and deserve, especially if you're not doing anything wrong in this situation. And so I'm a firm believer of calling people out in a situation where you feel like you're not being treated equally. And for all the men watching, you need to be, in a situation like that, you need to be allies. I mean, I know Bobby's a huge feminist here, but it's been really lovely to see. I've been in situations in the past where I feel like my voice is being shut down, and men speaking up and being like, actually, no, I think that's a great idea, and here's why, and really letting me take the reign and giving me that confidence. And it's definitely a slow learning process and experience, but I think you need to advocate for yourself.
Okay, better watch the table because you're moving.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know. So one thing I'll say about this is I think it's number one. I think the biggest challenge that whether you do it aggressively like you did or you do it in a kind of very, very polite way, it's hard. You're going to get complaints either way about you're too weak or too strong, whatever it might be. The most important thing is for you to call it out. That's the most. As long as you say it, that's a really important thing. The second thing you mentioned is allyship. I think it's so important for men to be allies. Absolutely. I think